When my son's wife said, "Grandparents are by invitation only," I thought it was a joke. I had driven 400 miles to be there, to finally show up, to finally make it right. But standing outside that baby shower, clutching a wrapped stroller I spent weeks restoring, I realized something. Maybe I was never meant to be let in. Not just to the party, but to their lives. By the time I drove back to the nearest motel, the word uninvited hit harder than I thought it would. I had already missed birthdays, graduations, and all the Sunday dinners in between. But this felt like being erased. Quietly, deliberately. And I couldn't help but wonder, what had I done so wrong that even an attempt to return was met with a locked door? They didn't know what I knew. They didn't know the truth behind the night their mother died, or how long I've carried that guilt alone. And they certainly didn't expect what I'd do next, because when you've spent a lifetime being shut out, there's only one thing left to do. Walk through the fire, even if no one's waiting on the other side. Before we unravel the night that changed everything, make sure to stay till the end, because this story will remind you that the deepest betrayals don't always come with raised voices, but with doors that quietly never open. I retired 2 years ago, but most days still start before dawn. The silence of the house wakes me more than any alarm clock could. 66 isn't old enough to be irrelevant, but it sure feels that way when your phone hasn't rung in weeks. When I found out Emily was pregnant, through a Facebook post my niece showed me, I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Not because I was surprised. Michael always said he wanted to be a father someday. But because my name wasn't tagged, my comment wasn't liked, and my number wasn't called. Still, I wasn't going to let that stop me. I called Sarah, my niece, and gently asked where the baby shower was going to be held. She hesitated. "It's kind of a private thing, Uncle Rob. Emily's side is planning most of it." "I just want the address," I said. "I won't make a scene." What I didn't tell her, what I hadn't told anyone, was that for the past 6 months, I'd been working on a gift. Not bought, built. In my garage, I found an old wooden stroller frame I used when Michael was a baby. Broken, weathered, nearly useless. But I restored it, polished the wood, reupholstered the seat with fabric from his mother's old chair, even added brass fittings I ordered from Italy. It wasn't just a stroller, it was memory, apology, legacy. So I loaded it into the back of my SUV, wrapped in a navy blue blanket, and began the drive. 400 miles of second-guessing and rehearsed conversations. The first 100 miles were filled with excitement. I imagined Michael seeing the stroller, running his hand along the handles, maybe even tearing up. I pictured Emily's smile, how she'd place a hand on her belly and say something like, "He's going to love this." I told myself this trip could be the beginning of something new. The second 100 were quieter. I started replaying the last time we'd spoken, at his wedding, 5 years ago. We only exchanged a few words. Emily's parents had been more prominent that day, which made sense. I sat in the back row and left before the cake was cut. The third 100 brought regret. Memories trickled in. His 8th birthday I missed because of a rescheduled parent-teacher conference. The Thanksgiving I forgot to call. The voicemail I never returned. There weren't many blow-ups between us, just a long, slow fade into silence. But by the final stretch of highway, a strange calm settled over me. The kind that comes when you've made peace with the past, but still hope for something more. I glanced at the letter I'd written the night before, folded neatly in my glove compartment. In it, I apologized. Not just for missing moments, but for not being brave enough to repair them sooner. I planned to give it to him after the party, when we'd hopefully be sitting on a porch somewhere, talking like fathers and sons do. I pulled into the community center's parking lot 10 minutes early. It was a modern brick building surrounded by pink and blue balloons. People were laughing. Kids were running around. And there was a welcome sign on the front door that read, "It's a boy." I parked, took a deep breath, and opened the trunk. The stroller looked even more beautiful in the sunlight than I remembered. I pulled it out gently, the wheels squeaking slightly as I guided it across the lot. The entrance was busy. Guests walking in with wrapped gifts, chatting casually. I approached the door, heart pounding, shoulders straight, trying not to look too eager. But just as I reached the steps, a woman in a staff uniform stepped in front of me. Her tone was polite but firm. "I'm sorry, sir. This event is private. Only invited guests can enter." I blinked. "I'm the grandfather," I said. "Robert, Michael's father." She gave a hesitant smile, then checked a clipboard. "I don't see your name here. It's by invitation only. You'll need to contact the family directly." I stood there, stroller in hand, as conversations and laughter continued behind the glass doors. For a moment, I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Michael had just forgotten to mention me. Maybe the list was incomplete. But as the minutes passed, and no one came out, no one waved me in, and my phone stayed silent, that hope crumbled. I turned around slowly and walked back to the car, every step heavier than the last. I placed the stroller back inside, gently, like it might break. Then I sat behind the wheel and stared ahead, not moving. The sun was bright, but everything felt dim. The words rang in my head, louder than anything else. Grandparents are by invitation only. And I hadn't been invited. I sat in the car for what must have been hours. The clock said 30 minutes had passed, but it didn't feel like time moved at all. My fingers still hovered near the door handle, like I might try again. Walk up, explain, insist. But the laughter drifting out from the community center only made the silence around me louder. I pulled out my phone and called Michael. It rang twice, then straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. I stared at the screen for a moment, thumb hovering over the text message icon. But what could I even say? "Hey, I'm here. Remember me?" The words felt pathetic, so I sat, holding the phone like it might warm in my hand if I waited long enough. Then I saw her, Emily. She walked by the window, maybe 20 feet away, holding a tray of cupcakes. Our eyes met briefly, no more than a second. She gave a polite nod, the kind you give a stranger at a grocery store, then looked away and kept moving. No wave, no smile, no recognition. I could have convinced myself it was just a mistake. Maybe she didn't recognize me through the window glare. Maybe she was busy, but I didn't believe that. Not really. The ache that settled in my chest wasn't sharp. It was dull, heavy, and deeply familiar, like an old wound remembering how to hurt. I leaned back in the seat, arms crossed, trying to hold myself together. And for the first time in a long while, I felt embarrassed. Truly, gut-deep embarrassed. Not because I'd driven 400 miles, not because I'd built something with my hands, but because I had let myself believe, really believe, I was still part of something. I should have left, but I didn't. Instead, I waited. I waited until the party was clearly winding down, until people started leaving with balloons and goodie bags and tiny favors, until the laughter turned into quiet goodbyes. But no one looked for me. No one came outside to say, "Where have you been?" Or, "We saved you a plate." Mom, I waited until the sun dipped low and the sky burned orange, then climbed into the back seat of my SUV. The stroller beside me still smelled faintly of the wood polish I'd used the night before. That night, I didn't bother looking for a motel. I stayed right there, parked a few blocks away from the community center in front of a row of closed shops. The same road I'd once imagined as a path back into fatherhood now felt like a border I wasn't allowed to cross. I didn't cry. Not really. But there were moments, short, sharp ones, where my eyes burned and my chest tightened. The kind of pain that doesn't come with tears, but with the quiet understanding that maybe some doors never open again. Morning light broke early, washing the windows with pale gold. I hadn't slept much. My back ached, my mouth was dry. But mostly, I felt unfinished, like the story shouldn't end there. So I took a breath and did something I wasn't sure I had the courage to do. I texted Sarah. "Hey, sweetheart, quick question. Do you know why I wasn't invited yesterday?" I stared at the message, thumb hovering over send. Then I hit it, instantly regretted it, tried not to imagine her face when she read it. The reply came 10 minutes later. "Wait, what? I thought you said you couldn't come. Michael told us you were busy. That's why we didn't put your name down." I read the words again, then again. I could feel something rise in my chest, slow, creeping, like steam from a kettle just before it whistles. He told them I couldn't come. Not that I wasn't invited. Not that there'd been a miscommunication, but that I had said no. Sarah followed up quickly. "We all thought you didn't care that much. Emily's parents said it was small, so we figured maybe you were just being polite." "I'm so sorry, Uncle Rob. I had no idea." I didn't answer right away. I needed a moment to breathe. My hands were shaking. Michael had told everyone I wasn't coming. He'd made sure no one expected me. He'd built a wall before I even got near the door. The question twisted in my gut like a knife. Why? What was he protecting? Or more truthfully, what was he hiding? I met Sarah at a diner just off the highway, 2 towns over. It was her idea, to keep things quiet, away from prying family eyes. I appreciated that. The place smelled like bacon grease and burnt coffee, and the booths were cracked from years of elbows and elbows of years. But it was quiet, and I needed quiet. She slid into the booth across from me, her face pale with concern. "Uncle Rob," she said before I even ordered. "I'm really sorry. I swear I thought you decided not to come. Michael didn't even make it sound personal, just like life. You know? You being busy." "I wasn't," I said, voice dry as sand. "I've been retired for 2 years. My only job these days is remembering when to take my blood pressure pills." She looked down, guilty. He never said it with anger, just matter of fact, like it was expected. "That's what hurts most," I murmured. "That me not showing up is just expected." She stayed quiet a moment, then reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. "I found this in the baby shower guest basket. I think Emily made extras and forgot to mail some out." I opened it slowly. It was a generic invitation with blue footprints and cursive letters. Nothing handwritten. but my name wasn't on it. No address, no stamp, just a generic template that could have been meant for anyone, could have been meant for no one. So I wasn't supposed to get this, I said, holding it up. Sarah hesitated. I don't think Michael ever planned for you to be there. My stomach twisted. Why? She looked like she was debating something. Then she leaned in, whispering, Maybe you should ask him. I gave a dry laugh. He won't pick up the phone. You think he's going to open the door? Then write, she said. You always used to write. Remember when you'd send postcards from your business trips? I still have one with a cartoon moose from Minnesota. I gave a faint smile. I remembered that trip. Michael had been 7. I'd been trying to keep my job after the divorce, stretching myself thin between 2 worlds. I had no idea he'd kept anything. That night, I sat in the motel with my notebook and started writing. Dear Michael, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from right now. Maybe the last person you've wanted to hear from for years. I don't blame you. Not for the silence, not for the anger. I earned more than a little of it. But I want you to know this. I came. I showed up. I didn't stay away because I didn't care. I stayed away because I thought you needed me to. And I realize now that was cowardly. I filled 3 pages before the pen gave out. The words weren't perfect, but they were honest. I folded the letter neatly, tucked it into an envelope, and the next morning, I drove back to town and hand-delivered it to Emily's mailbox. No note, no knock, just hope. Then I waited. 2 days, nothing. No call, no message, not even a returned envelope. The silence felt sharper this time. Not like an absence, but a refusal. Like I was being erased on purpose. I told myself maybe they were busy. Maybe they needed time. But deep down, I knew better. On the 3rd day, Sarah called me. Uncle Rob, she said, her voice soft. I think I know why. My heart skipped. Why what? Why he didn't want you there. Why he's like this. I sat down slowly. Go on? She hesitated. When Michael was 8, Mom said he called you late one night. Said Aunt Lynn, your ex, was having chest pains, and he was scared. She told him to call 911, but he panicked and called you first. Said it rang and rang. You never answered. I froze. I never got that call, I said. I know, but Michael thinks you did. I couldn't breathe for a moment. She died that night, Sarah continued. Heart attack. He's always believed. She stopped, voice cracking. He's always believed that you ignored him, that you didn't pick up, because you didn't care. I closed my eyes, and for a second, I wasn't 66. I was 38, sitting in a hotel room with a muted TV, answering emails, and thinking I had all the time in the world to fix things. He never told me, I whispered. No one ever did. Sarah sighed. I think it became something he buried, but it shaped everything. I felt the weight of that night all over again, this time with the full gravity of what it had meant to my son. He hadn't just lost his mother. He'd lost the belief that his father would show up when it mattered, and no apology in the world could rewrite that. I stayed in that motel another night, letterless this time, unsure of my next step. There's a kind of grief that comes not from death, but from the stories people carry about you, stories you never got to defend yourself in. Now I understood. Michael didn't want me there because to him, I had already failed the most critical test a father ever faces. Being there when your child cries for help. And to him, I'd failed before the baby was born. I didn't call ahead. I didn't text. I simply drove. Michael and Emily lived in a beige two-story house on a quiet cul-de-sac, the kind of place where lawnmowers hummed on Saturdays and wind chimes tinkled from porches. It was early evening when I pulled up, the lights soft, the shadows long. I parked 2 houses down and walked the rest of the way. The door was closed. I stood on the porch for a full minute before raising my hand to knock. My heart pounded like I was a teenager asking a girl's father for permission. Except I wasn't asking permission. I was demanding truth. The door opened. Michael stood there, taller than I remembered, with tired eyes and a face that looked more like mine than I'd ever admitted. He froze. "I just want to talk," I said. "Please." He stepped aside wordlessly, and I walked into the house that smelled faintly of vanilla and new furniture. We sat in the living room, across from each other, separated by a coffee table and 2 decades of silence. "I didn't know about the call," I began. His jaw tightened. "The night your mother died. Sarah told me what happened, that you called me first, that I didn't answer." Michael didn't move. His eyes locked on mine, steady but simmering. "I swear to you," I continued, voice trembling, "I never saw that call. I would have dropped everything. I would have driven through a hurricane. I didn't ignore you." He let out a slow, bitter laugh. "You always say that you would have. But the point is, you didn't." I flinched. "You weren't there for the call. You weren't there at the funeral. You weren't there at all," he said, voice rising. "You don't get to show up now and pretend like a stroller makes up for a lifetime." "I'm not pretending," I said quietly. "I know it doesn't. Nothing ever will. But I'm here now." He stood, pacing. Now, when I'm about to become a father? You think now is the time to try again?" I thought it was better than never." "Well, you thought wrong." His words cut. Not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. "Do you know what it's like?" he said, turning to me. "To sit next to your mom while she's gasping for air, holding a phone to your ear, praying your father will pick up, and hearing nothing?" I swallowed hard. "I didn't know. I swear." He shook his head. "I waited 25 years to hear that, and it still doesn't help." I stood too, my voice firmer than I expected. "Then tell me what would help. Tell me what you want from me, Michael. Because I can't change the past. But I'm not going to keep standing outside your life like a ghost." He stared at me. A long silence stretched between us. "I want you to admit it," he said finally, "that you failed. That you weren't a good dad. Not just once. Always." I took a deep breath. "I failed," I said. "I wasn't there when you needed me. I missed too much. I made excuses. I let guilt and shame keep me away when I should have fought to stay close. I wasn't a good father." The words sat heavy in the room. "But," I added, "I want to try to be a good grandfather, if you'll let me." Michael didn't answer. He looked away, eyes glossy but dry. There were no hugs, no closure, just silence. But it wasn't the kind of silence that pushed me out. It was the kind that left a door cracked open. I took that as enough, for now. I turned to leave, but before I reached the door, he said, "Wait." I paused. "The stroller?" he said. "You made it yourself?" "Yes." He nodded, then turned away. I thought that would be the end of it, until Emily showed up the next day. She knocked on my motel door around noon, holding a paper bag with what smelled like soup. I opened the door, surprised. "I'm not here to smooth things over," she said quickly. "Just to talk." I stepped aside, and she walked in, placing the bag on the desk. I'm sorry for what happened at the baby shower, she said. It wasn't fair. No, I agreed. It wasn't. She sat down, her shoulders tense. It wasn't Michael who insisted you stay away. He didn't push for that. I tilted my head. Then who did? She hesitated. My parents. That caught me off guard. They're very traditional. They like things clean and uncomplicated. When I told them about your history with Michael, they decided it was better if you weren't there. Less drama, they said. And you agreed? I didn't fight them, she admitted, eyes downcast. And neither did Michael. We were both cowards. I studied her. He didn't want me there, I said, more as a statement than a question. He didn't know how to want you there, she replied. He's still carrying too much, but he didn't not want you either. He just froze. I sat down. The anger that had simmered earlier now dulled into something else. Resignation. We should have said something, she continued. We should have been honest. But it was easier to let you think it was a mistake than to deal with the truth. I nodded slowly. I'm not asking you to forgive us, she added. But I wanted you to know. Thank you, I said. She stood to leave, then paused. He read your letter, by the way. Oh? He didn't say much. Just that. It was the first time in years he didn't feel alone reading your name. She left, and I sat alone in that cheap motel room, watching the sunlight shift across the floor. No promises had been made, no bridges rebuilt. But for the first time in decades, something small had shifted. The storm had broken, and behind the clouds, there was light. I drove back home the following day with no intention of returning. Not to that town, not to that street, not to that hope I had nursed too long. The motel room had felt like purgatory, and as I pulled onto my own street, the familiarity of everything, the mailbox leaning slightly to the left, the creak of the front porch step, was oddly comforting. This was my kingdom now. Quiet, predictable, safe. I parked, stepped inside, and left the stroller in the garage. I didn't even take the blanket off. For 2 days, I avoided the garage entirely. I busied myself with chores I hadn't touched in weeks, mowed the lawn, sorted the junk drawer, dusted shelves that hadn't seen a cloth in years. But even with the vacuum on, or the radio playing, my mind echoed with one sentence. You weren't a good father. On the 3rd day, Sarah called. She didn't ask how I was. You home safe? Yes. A pause. I think you did the right thing, she said softly. I didn't do anything. You went. You said the words. That's more than you used to. I chuckled bitterly. Not a high bar. She paused again, then said something I didn't expect. You were a father who disappeared, but now you're showing up. That counts, even if they don't say it yet. After we hung up, I walked to the garage and uncovered the stroller. It was still beautiful. The brass gleamed in the late afternoon light. The wood was warm, smooth under my fingers. I remembered sanding it, layer by layer, as if removing the past splinters piece by piece. It deserved to be with them, not with me. So I made a choice. I wrote a new letter. Not the kind that begged or explained. Just a quiet offering. Dear Michael and Emily, I've learned that timing can be cruel. That sometimes the right intentions arrive in the wrong order. I want you to have this stroller. I made it not to fix anything, but because building it made me feel closer to you both. And to the boy I failed, and the man you became despite that. You owe me nothing. This gift comes without expectation. But if one day your son sits in it, and you think of me, I hope it's not with anger, but maybe with the faint understanding that I tried in the only way I knew how. Wishing you both a quiet joy. Dad, I wrapped the stroller again, loaded it into the truck, and made the drive back. I didn't knock. I didn't linger. I simply left it on their porch, tied with twine, the letter taped gently to the handle. Then I turned around, got back in the truck, and drove the entire 400 miles home without stopping. That was supposed to be the end of it. But 1 week later, Sarah called again. Uncle Rob. I knew that voice. Something had changed. He wants to see you. I blinked. Who? My brother. Not to talk. Just dinner. Tomorrow. I said nothing for a beat. She continued. He didn't say why, but I think he's ready to try. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. That night, just as I was about to turn off the lights, my phone buzzed. A message from Michael. If you're free, dinner tomorrow. 7. Nothing big. That was it. No apologies, no promises, just 7 words. And somehow, it meant more than I could say. The next day, I arrived early, parked quietly at the curb. My palms were damp, my stomach tight. But there was something else, a flicker of anticipation I hadn't felt in years. The door opened before I could knock. Michael stood there in jeans and a worn t-shirt, barefoot, his hair slightly disheveled. You're early, he said. Traffic was kind. He stepped aside. I walked in. Emily was in the kitchen. She gave a small smile, one that wasn't forced. On the couch sat the stroller, unwrapped, a folded baby blanket draped across it. Michael caught me looking. He kicks when we roll it, he said. I didn't reply. I couldn't. We sat down to dinner. Simple pasta, garlic bread, salad. Nothing fancy. We didn't talk much. No deep revelations. No confessions. But we passed dishes. We asked for salt. We laughed once at something the dog did. It wasn't a reunion. It was something smaller, quieter, real. At the end of the meal, as we cleared plates, Michael turned to me. I don't know what this means yet, he said. But I'm not angry tonight. That was enough. For the first time in decades, I felt like I'd been let inside. Not just the house, but the family. And all it took was showing up. Again, and again, and again. The second dinner wasn't planned. I got the text the morning of, short and casual. We're making stew tonight. Come if you're hungry. It was signed with a dash. No name, no punctuation. But it felt like a second invitation. The table was the same. Small, round, scuffed at the edges from years of elbows and plates and family. The chairs didn't match. One wobbled slightly. But there was a warmth to it. Something real. Lived in. Emily greeted me with a soft smile and a nod, the same way someone might acknowledge an old song on the radio. Familiar, not overwhelming. Michael offered me a beer, then sat without ceremony. The meal was quiet. No fireworks. No probing questions. Just stew, warm bread, and a rhythm that felt remarkably like peace. Occasionally, someone reached for the salt or passed a napkin. It wasn't the words we spoke. It was the pauses we no longer filled with tension. I didn't bring up the past. Neither did he. There was no rehashing, no apologies. We didn't need to dissect the wound. We were finally letting it scab over. Midway through the meal, Emily disappeared into the nursery. When she returned, she was holding something wrapped in a pale yellow blanket. The baby. She walked over and gently placed the bundle into my arms. He was impossibly small. His eyes shut tight, fists balled near his chin. A faint sigh escaped his lips as he adjusted to the unfamiliar hands cradling him. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The room fell into a hush that didn't ask for explanation. My arms remembered the motion, even after all those years. Rock gently. Don't bounce too much. Support the head. Michael watched me quietly. There was something in his eyes. Not approval. Not forgiveness. But permission. He likes the stroller, he said softly. Sleeps better in it than the bassinet. I nodded, still staring at the tiny miracle in my arms. Then, with a voice low and even, Michael said, "Next time, maybe you can be there from the beginning." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't staged. But in those 9 words, something opened. A door I had long believed was sealed shut. I held on to them like oxygen. The weeks that followed weren't marked by grand gestures. Just small, quiet repetitions. A Tuesday call. A Sunday drop-in. A shared errand for diapers. A text with a photo. The baby smiling in the stroller. Nothing was official. We didn't label anything. But there was rhythm now. Momentum. A shared gravity. One night, back at my own home, I sat by the fireplace, flipping through an old photo album. Michael, at 5, holding a toy truck. Me, grinning awkwardly, one hand on his shoulder. His mother in the background, out of focus, laughing. The photos were faded, but the weight of them remained. That version of me, young, scared, distracted, did the best he could. But this version, older, slower, more deliberate. He was learning how to show up. There's a myth that reconciliation comes with trumpets and speeches, dramatic reunions and weeping embraces. But the truth, sometimes it's stew on a Thursday. Sometimes it's a smile during a diaper change. Sometimes it's just being handed your grandchild without a word, and knowing that's enough. I no longer needed the apology I once thought was essential. I no longer carried the expectation that Michael would look at me and say, "You were a good father." That's not the role I was trying to reclaim. I wasn't fixing the past. I was building something new. For every day I'd missed, I was adding a day now. For every silence, I was offering presence. Not perfection, just presence. One evening, months later, as we sat together on the porch, me, Michael, Emily, and the baby asleep in my arms, Michael turned and asked, "Do you remember the old beach house?" I blinked. "The one in Maine?" "Of course. You used to take me there during your weekends." He paused. "I always thought you hated those trips." I chuckled. I loved them. I just didn't know how to say it then. He nodded, then went quiet. We didn't need to say more. We'd finally found the language between words. Now, every so often, when someone asks me about being a father, I say something I never would have believed years ago. It's not about what you missed. It's about what you choose next. Being there doesn't always mean arriving on time. Sometimes it means returning anyway, knowing the door might not open, but knocking regardless. Because forgiveness isn't always a word. Sometimes forgiveness is a seat at the table. And if you're lucky, it comes with warm bread, a quiet smile, and the soft weight of a second chance in your arms.